You can't be serious. The woman's voice was a grating symphony of entitlement, a sound that could curdle milk at 50 paces. This is Heron's Landing common property. The beautification committee has allocated $16,000 to have this eyesore graded, filled, and sodded. Our approved contractors will be here Monday at 8 a.m. to begin work. I stood on the porch of the house my grandfather built, a solid cypress structure that had watched over this land for 90 years. In my hand was a mug of black coffee still steaming in the cool morning air. Before me, beyond the ancient live oaks dripping with Spanish moss, lay the reason for this woman's visit. Miller's Basin. For most of the last decade, it had been a wide, dusty expanse of cracked earth, a mosaic of tans and browns fringed with hardy marsh grasses, a dry lake bed. My dry lake bed. The woman, who I would soon learn was named Brenda Snodgrass, president of the Heron's Landing Homeowners Association, stood precisely on the survey marker that delineated my property from the new, sprawling subdivision that had consumed the adjacent cattle ranch. She was a plus-sized woman, poured into a too-tight polo shirt bearing a vaguely fascistic logo of a stylized heron. She held a clipboard like a scepter, her knuckles white. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The silence stretched, filled only by the chirping of a distant Carolina wren. Her authority, so absolute in her world of beige houses and uniform lawn heights, dissipated completely as it crossed the boundary onto my land. It became a faint, irrelevant vapor in the scent of pine and damp earth. "Ma'am," I said, my voice intentionally low and calm, "you are standing on the edge of my property. The basin you are referring to is the central feature of that property. It has been in my family for 3 generations. Your contractors will not be setting foot on it, much less a bulldozer blade." Brenda's face, already florid, deepened to a shade of plum. "I think you'll find the covenants, conditions, and restrictions for Heron's Landing grant, the board broad authority over all adjacent parcels to ensure aesthetic continuity. This depression is a blight and negatively impacts our property values." "My land is not an adjacent parcel to your subdivision," I stated, setting my mug down on the railing. "It is a private holding that predates your development by nearly a century. It is not subject to your covenants, your conditions, or your restrictions." She took a half step back, as if the sheer audacity of my statement was a physical force. "We have docks," she screeched, pointing a trembling, sausage-like finger towards the far end of the basin. "The community paid a fortune for those waterfront amenities." I followed her gesture. There they were. 3 brand-new aluminum and plastic floating docks, sitting forlornly on the cracked mud, connected by a long ramp to the manicured community lawn of Heron's Landing. They looked ridiculous, like beached whales waiting for a tide that would never come. They had been installed the previous summer, a monument to the developer's optimistic marketing and complete ignorance of local hydrology. "You built docks on my dry lake bed," I said. It wasn't a question. That was a bold move. "It's a reservoir," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "The sales brochure clearly labels it Heron Lake. You are illegally depriving us of our lake." "I am doing nothing of the sort," I replied. "I am merely owning the land upon which you trespassed to install your useless docks. Now, I have some fence posts to check. I'd appreciate it if you would remove yourself from my property line." "You will be hearing from our attorneys," she shrieked as I turned to go back inside. "We will file liens. We will have this property condemned. You have been warned." I closed the solid cypress door behind me, the sound a satisfying thud. The war had begun. but she had no idea what kind of soldier she was trying to fight. I was Colonel John Miller, United States Army Corps of Engineers, retired. For 30 years, I had managed billion-dollar infrastructure projects, navigated the labyrinth of federal and state regulations, and dealt with contractors far more intimidating than a woman in a tight polo shirt. She wanted a war over a dry lake bed. I would give her a campaign. A week later, the first salvo of the paper assault arrived. It was not a lawyer's letter, as she had threatened, but something far more indicative of her mindset. It was a formal violation notice from the Heron's Landing HOA Architectural Review Committee. The envelope was made of heavy, cream-colored bond paper, feeling substantial and important in my hand. In the top left corner, the fascistic heron was embossed in a deep forest green. I opened it with the silver letter opener my father had kept on his desk. The notice was printed on the same thick cardstock. The language was a masterpiece of bureaucratic passive aggression. It listed 3 distinct violations. First, failure to maintain approved ground cover, citing a non-existent clause about parcels visible from community property. Second, presence of unsanctioned topographical features, which I could only assume referred to the basin itself. Third, and my personal favorite, violation of aesthetic continuity, a catch-all charge of such breathtaking vagueness it was legally meaningless. At the bottom, in an aggressive bold font, was the penalty: a fine of $100 per day per violation, retroactive to the date of my verbal non-compliance. A running total of $2,100 was already helpfully calculated. I felt a familiar sensation settle over me, one I hadn't truly felt since my last command. It wasn't hot, explosive anger. It was a slow, dangerous calm. It was the feeling of an objective being clearly identified, of an operational theater defining itself. The enemy had revealed her tactics: bureaucratic harassment and financial intimidation. She believed she could paper me into submission. This was a mistake. Paper was my world. I went into my study, the room where I managed my pension, investments, and the modest affairs of the Miller estate. From a bottom drawer, I retrieved a new 3-inch D-ring binder. It was heavy, black, and built for serious work. On the spine, I inserted a freshly printed label. It read, Operation Spring Freedom. The violation notice from Brenda Snodgrass became the first document. I slid it into a clear plastic sleeve and clipped it into the first section, labeled Enemy Communications. I then created a second section, Opposition Research, and a third, Counteroffensive. The binder felt good in my hands. It was a field manual for the war to come. Brenda Snodgrass thought she was dealing with some folksy old retiree. She was about to discover she had declared war on a man who found comfort in logistics and joy in meticulous documentation. She had sent me a piece of paper. I was going to build her a fortress of it. My first phase of reconnaissance was to study the enemy's own doctrine. I went to the Heron's Landing public website and downloaded the full 172-page PDF of their covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I brewed a full pot of coffee and spent the next 6 hours reading every word, highlighting and annotating the digital document like it was an after-action report. It was exactly what I expected, a poorly drafted template document, full of contradictory clauses, ambiguous definitions, and procedural holes big enough to drive a combat engineering vehicle through. The section she had vaguely referenced, about adjacent parcels, was clearly written to apply to lots within the subdivision itself, not historically separate properties. Her entire legal premise was built on a deliberate misinterpretation of her own rules. I saved a copy of the document, with my annotations, to a thumb drive and filed a printed version in the Opposition Research section of the binder. But the CC and RS were just her playbook. I needed to consult a higher authority. The next morning, I drove to the county seat, to the Records and Deeds office in the basement of the old courthouse. The air in the records room was thick with the smell of old paper and dust, a scent I found deeply reassuring. I spent 3 hours hunched over a clattering microfilm reader, scrolling through decades of property surveys and plat maps. And there it was, the original 1928 survey of my grandfather's purchase. The lines were drawn in elegant, spidery ink. The property boundaries were clearly marked with iron pins and witness trees, and right in the center, the basin was delineated with a dotted line and labeled Miller's Sump, Seasonal Watershed. More importantly, the deed that accompanied it contained a specific clause, granting my family full and perpetual riparian rights to the natural spring and all surface and groundwaters contained within the aforementioned parcel. This was more than a shield. This was a sword. Her entire argument was that the basin was a community lake she had rights to. My family's deed, recorded and inviolable, proved it was my private watershed, spring and all. The developer who sold her community their dream of lakefront property had either been incompetent or had committed massive fraud. I paid the clerk $5 for certified copies of the 1928 survey map and the original deed. They felt heavy in my hand, dense with the weight of law and history. As I slid them into a fresh plastic sleeve for the binder, I felt the first, grim satisfaction of a successful intelligence-gathering mission. The next step was to contact an even higher authority. Brenda had built her docks and planned her landscaping without consulting the one entity that actually governed watersheds in our state, the Department of Environmental Protection. I found the number for the regional office and made the call. The man who answered sounded monumentally bored. DEP, Watershed Management, this is Stan. Good morning, Stan, I said. My name is John Miller. I'm calling to inquire about the permitting process for construction within a designated seasonal watershed containing a natural spring. You building a shed or something? Stan asked, his voice flat. No, I said. I'm the owner of the property. Another party, a homeowners association, has already constructed 3 large floating docks on the basin floor and has informed me of their intent to begin grading and filling operations next week. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The boredom in Stan's voice evaporated, replaced by a sharp, professional focus. Excuse me? They did what? On a natural spring-fed basin? Sir, can you give me the parcel ID number for your property? I read it to him from the county tax bill. I could hear him typing furiously. Okay, I've got it pulled up on the GIS map. Miller's Basin, Historic Register. Sir, there are no permits on file for any construction, grading, or water diversion for this parcel or any adjacent parcels. Not in the last 50 years. That's what I assumed, I said calmly. Sir, what this HOA has done is likely a significant violation of state environmental code, Stan said, his voice now laced with a kind of bureaucratic excitement. Interfering with a natural spring, unpermitted construction in a watershed. These are not small things. We're going to have to open an immediate investigation. Can you provide me with the name of the Homeowners Association and its president? I gave him Brenda's full name and the official title of the Heron's Landing HOA. I could almost hear him salivating. I was handing him a flagrant, well-documented violation on a silver platter. Bureaucrats live for moments like this. I'm opening a case file right now, Mr. Miller, he said. Case number E2479er. An enforcement officer will be out to inspect the site within 48 hours. We will be issuing a formal stop work order to the HOA pending our investigation. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I wrote down the case number on a fresh sheet of paper. It was a golden ticket. It transformed my dispute from a private squabble into an official state-level investigation. Brenda was no longer fighting just me. She was fighting the government. I slid the note with the case number into the binder. The counter-offensive section was beginning to look formidable. With my legal and regulatory flanks secured, it was time to build a resistance movement. Brenda had operated through fear, picking off residents one by one with petty fines and public shaming. A lone insurgent is easily crushed. A coordinated network is a commander's worst nightmare. I needed to find her other victims. It was not difficult. I started my recruitment drive by taking a slow walk through the pristine, curving streets of Heron's Landing. It was a neighborhood gripped by an oppressive silence. No children's toys on the lawns. No unapproved garden gnomes. Every blade of grass stood at attention. It was less a community and more a high-end correctional facility for lawn furniture. My first contact was an elderly woman tending a small rose garden next to a house that was, like all the others, a perfect shade of taupe. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wary. "Good afternoon," I said, stopping on the public sidewalk. "My name is John Miller. I own the property just east of here." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you're the one with the hun basin." "That's me," I smiled. "I'm just admiring your roses. They're beautiful." A flicker of pride crossed her face, quickly followed by a shadow of fear. "Thank you. They were my husband's pride and joy. I'm trying to keep them up for him." She lowered her voice. "The association says the color of the mulch is non-compliant. They want me to replace it with pine straw. $25 fine every week until I do." "My name is Margaret Gable," she said, wiping a gloved hand on her apron. "And it's not just the mulch. It was the bird bath last month. Unapproved lawn ornamentation. The wreath on my door after Christmas. Failure to remove seasonal decorations in a timely manner. It never ends." "Has she fined anyone else?" I asked gently. "Oh, heavens, yes," she whispered. "The Martinez family down the street. They have that lovely boy, Leo. They got a $200 fine because his basketball hoop was visible from the street for more than 4 hours after use. They're good people. They just want their son to be able to play." I thanked Mrs. Gable for her time, telling her that she was not alone in this. I walked down to the Martinez's house. A young man was in the driveway, packing a bright orange basketball hoop into the back of his minivan. He looked exhausted and defeated. I introduced myself. He was Carlos Martinez. "She won," he said, not even looking at me, just staring at the dismantled hoop. "We got another final notice. Pay the fine and remove it, or they'll put a lien on the house. We can't afford a fight. We just want to live here." "I understand," I said. "But what if you didn't have to fight alone?" He finally looked at me. I saw a spark of defiance in his eyes. I spent 20 minutes on his driveway, outlining the situation with my property, explaining that Brenda's authority was not as absolute as she pretended. I didn't ask him to join me. I simply told him I was building a case and that the stories of other residents were a crucial part of it. I gave him my phone number. By the end of the day, I had spoken to 5 families. The stories were all the same: petty tyranny, arbitrary enforcement, and fines designed to bleed people dry. I had planted the seeds of a rebellion. All they needed was a leader and a plan. I intended to provide both. That evening, I added a new section to the binder: collateral damage, witness statements. The binder was now nearly 3 inches thick. It contained property records going back to the Hoover administration, certified legal documents, printouts of HOA covenants, detailed notes from my conversations with victims, and the case number for an active state environmental investigation. It was a weapon of pure, unassailable fact. But a weapon is useless without someone who knows how to wield it in the proper theater. It was time to hire a professional. It was time to call in the cavalry. I didn't look for a real estate lawyer. I needed a specialist, a litigator. My research led me to a firm downtown and to a specific name, David Chen. The biography on his firm's website was concise. He specialized in property disputes and contract law, with a subspecialty in litigation against homeowners associations. The last line of the bio was the one that sold me. Prior to his legal career, Mr. Chen served for 12 years in the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, retiring at the rank of major. Perfect. He spoke my language. I called and made an appointment. When the receptionist asked for the nature of the consultation, I simply said, "An HOA dispute regarding property rights." 2 days later, I walked into David Chen's office. It was clean, modern, and efficient. No clutter. He was a man of about my age, sharp, with a calm, analytical gaze. We exchanged firm handshakes. He had the unmistakable bearing of a fellow former officer. "Colonel," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Good to meet you. My assistant said you have an HOA issue. Let's hear it." Instead of launching into the story, I simply placed the Operation Spring Freedom binder on his polished mahogany desk. The sheer weight of it made a satisfying thud. "I believe you'll find everything you need in there, Major," I said. "I've organized it into sections: enemy communications, opposition research, including their own governing documents, and my property's historical surveys. Then there's the counteroffensive, which includes correspondence with the state DEP and the case number for their ongoing investigation. The final sections detail witness statements from other residents." David Chen stared at the binder for a long moment, then looked at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Colonel, I've had hundreds of potential clients come in here with a shoebox full of crumpled letters and angry emails. You've brought me a fully developed opposition research file." He opened the binder. He didn't skim. He read. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft whisper of him turning the plastic-sleeved pages. He read my annotations of the CC and RS. He examined the certified copy of the 1928 deed. He paused for a long time on the note with the DEP case number. When he finally looked up, his expression was one of pure professional delight. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice holding a note of reverence. "This isn't a legal dispute. You've built a kill box, a perfectly prepared field of fire. Every piece of evidence, every legal precedent, every regulatory statute is a pre-cited weapon. She has no idea what she's walked into." "I believe in thorough preparation," I said. "Colonel, this woman, Brenda Snodgrass, hasn't just violated her own bylaws. She's likely committed multiple tortious interferences, attempted conversion of property, and violated at least 3 state environmental statutes. The fact that she put it all in writing is a gift from the litigation gods." He leaned back in his chair. "So what's our objective? A quick settlement? A lawsuit for damages?" "My objective is her complete and unconditional surrender," I stated. "I want her authority broken, her position eliminated, and the culture of fear she's created in that neighborhood dismantled. I want my peace and quiet back, and I want to ensure no one else has to deal with her brand of petty tyranny again." David Chen's smile widened. an objective I can fully support. Here's my recommendation. We don't file a lawsuit yet. That's a bazooka, and we don't need it. We're going to start with a surgical strike. We'll draft a cease and desist letter. But it won't be the usual boilerplate. It will be a detailed, multi-page strategic document. It will cite the specific state statutes she's violating. It will reference the active DEP investigation by case number. It will attach copies of your deed and the original survey. And it will put her and every member of her board on notice that they are now facing personal liability for their actions, not just as a corporate entity. Personal liability? I asked. Absolutely, he said. Once they've been formally notified that their actions are illegal and in violation of state law, their corporate shield becomes very thin. If they continue, they're acting with willful negligence. We'll make it clear that any further action, another fine, another threat, setting one foot on your property, will result in a lawsuit naming each of them individually. We're not just aiming at the HOA. We're aiming at Brenda Snodgrass's checking account. I like it, I said. The strategy, he continued, leaning forward, is to let her walk deeper into the trap. A person like this, a petty tyrant, will not react to this letter with reason. She will react with rage. She will escalate. And when she does, she will hang herself. We just provide the rope. He was right, of course. It was a classic military strategy. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. The letter he drafted was a thing of beauty, a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It was sent via certified mail to the HOA's official address, with copies sent to the personal home address of Brenda Snodgrass and each of the 4 other board members. The trap was set. Now, we just had to wait for the quarry to blunder into it. Brenda did not disappoint. For 2 weeks, there was silence. No new notices appeared in my mailbox. No angry phone calls. I knew, however, that this was not the quiet of surrender, but the quiet of a pressure cooker building steam. The cease and desist letter, with its talk of personal liability and state investigations, had surely sent the weaker members of her board into a panic. Brenda, however, was made of sterner, more arrogant stuff. Her response, when it came, was not a letter from a lawyer. It was a notice of a special executive hearing, posted on the community bulletin board and sent, again, on that heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It summoned me to appear before the board, to address the outstanding violations and the matter of unpermitted structures on community property, referring, I presumed, to my house. The hearing was scheduled in 1 week's time. It was a show trial. She was ignoring my lawyer's letter entirely and attempting to reassert her authority in her own star chamber. It was a foolish, predictable blunder. David and I had already decided I would not attend. My presence would legitimize the proceeding. Instead, David sent a second letter, shorter and sharper than the first, informing the board that any hearing regarding my legally separate property was null and void, that their actions constituted continued harassment, and that our offer to settle the matter without litigation was now officially rescinded. And then the weather changed. For weeks, the sky had been a relentless, hazy blue. But a new front moved in from the Gulf, a slow, lumbering beast of a storm system. The rain started on a Tuesday, a soft, persistent drizzle. By Wednesday, it was a steady downpour. By Friday, it was a deluge. The wind howled through the pines, and the rain came down in sheets, a relentless, percussive drumming on the metal roof of my house. The local news called it a once-in-a-decade rain event. I watched it all from my porch, a deep satisfaction growing within me. My grandfather had always said, "This house has good bones, and a high foundation for a reason. While the perfectly manicured lawns of Heron's Landing were turning into shallow ponds and their storm drains gurgled in protest, my land was doing what it was designed to do. The water flowed down the gentle slopes into the basin. Slowly, miraculously, Miller's Basin began to fill. The cracked earth softened and darkened. Puddles formed, then merged. The dry, dusty bowl transformed into a vast, shallow sheet of water. The dormant seeds of marsh plants, waiting years for this moment, began to stir. After a week of nonstop rain, the water was a foot deep. After 10 days, it was nearly 3 feet deep. The basin was no longer a basin. It was a lake. My lake. And Brenda's expensive community docks, the ones sitting uselessly on the mud, were now floating. They bobbed gently, tethered by their ramp to the soggy turf of the HOA common area. They were also, undeniably, floating on about 3 acres of water that was entirely contained within the boundaries of my property. Her panic must have been immense. Her Heron Lake had appeared, but it only served to highlight her monumental folly. On the 12th day of the rain, she made her final, critical mistake. I was in my study, cataloging the notice for the special hearing in the binder, when I saw the truck pull up on the far side of the newly formed lake. It was a large flatbed from a company called Lakeshore Solutions. 2 men in rain gear got out and began striding purposefully toward the docks. Brenda Snodgrass was there too, standing under a large golf umbrella, directing them with imperious gestures. She was attempting a direct action. She was trying to move her docks. I pulled on my old field jacket and boots. I grabbed the binder. It was heavy, a solid 10 pounds of meticulously organized evidence. I walked out my back door and down to the new shoreline of my lake. The 2 workmen were fumbling with the bolts connecting the ramp to the shore. "Good morning," I said, my voice carrying easily over the rain-dampened air. The men looked up, startled. Brenda spun around, her face a mask of fury. "Miller, get off this community property," she bellowed. "Actually, Brenda, you're the one who is trespassing," I said calmly. I stopped at the water's edge, well within my property line. "And you, gentlemen," I said, addressing the 2 workers, "are about to commit felony trespass and destruction of property. I suggest you stop what you're doing immediately." "They are contractors under my direction," Brenda shrieked. "We are moving our property." "You are attempting to move your property from my land, where it is currently trespassing," I corrected her. "You have no legal right to be here, and neither do they." I opened the binder to the certified plat map, the plastic sleeve protecting it from the rain. This is a certified 1928 survey map. As you can see, the property line is 50 feet behind where your president is standing. This entire body of water is on my land. The older of the 2 workmen, clearly the foreman, looked from the map to Brenda, then back to me. He was no fool. He could see he was being dragged into a legal minefield. "Furthermore," I continued, flipping to the next section of the binder, "this is a copy of a cease and desist letter from my attorney, sent to your employer 2 weeks ago, putting her on notice of her illegal actions. And this," I flipped again, "is the case number for an active investigation by the State Department of Environmental Protection into her unpermitted construction on this very spot. If you so much as loosen another bolt, your company will be named as a co-defendant in the subsequent lawsuit, and I will personally ensure the DEP is aware that you knowingly violated their jurisdiction. I am also recording this entire encounter." I held up my phone, which had been filming since I left the house. The foreman's face went pale. He dropped the wrench he was holding. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, his voice tight. "We can't do this. This is a legal matter. We're not insured for this kind of thing. We're out of here." "You can't leave," Brenda sputtered. "I'm ordering you." "You can order all you want," the man said, already walking back towards his truck. "You hired us to move a dock, not commit a felony." His partner quickly followed. They got in their truck and drove away, leaving Brenda standing alone in the rain, her umbrella drooping, utterly defeated. She stared at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. Then she turned and stomped back to her car. I had documented her final, desperate, and illegal act. It was the last piece of ammunition I needed. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected quarter. The evening after the failed dock-moving gambit, I received a call from a blocked number. It was a man's voice, nervous and quiet. "Is this Mr. Miller?" he asked. "It is." "My name is Arthur Pinter. I'm the treasurer of the Heron's Landing HOA. I waited. "I saw what happened at the basin today," he stammered. "She's out of control. The letters from your lawyer, she just threw them away. She told the board you were a crazy old man and that she had it handled. But this is going too far. I can't be a part of it anymore." "What do you want, Arthur?" I asked. "I want out," he said, his voice cracking. "And I want you to have this. She's been using the beautification contingency fund like her own personal piggy bank for years. No-bid contracts to her brother-in-law's landscaping company for twice the market rate, using HOA money to pay the initial retainer for the lawyer who threatened you. It's all in the financials. I can't go to the police, she'd ruin me. But you can do something with it." He told me he would leave a USB drive in the newspaper box at the end of my driveway. An hour later, under the cover of darkness, I retrieved it. It was the smoking gun, the kill shot. Arthur had given me the keys to the kingdom. Spreadsheets, scanned invoices, bank statements. A clear, undeniable pattern of embezzlement, self-dealing, and cronyism. She wasn't just a tyrant. She was a common thief. The annual HOA meeting was the designated battlefield. It was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile beige room that smelled of industrial cleaner and weak coffee. The room was packed. Word of the confrontation at the lake had spread like wildfire. The seeds of rebellion I had planted were beginning to sprout. I saw Mrs. Gable in the front row, and the Martinez family near the back. They gave me small, nervous nods. My insurgents were in place. David Chen sat beside me, looking calm and predatory in a perfectly tailored suit. My binder lay on the table in front of us. Brenda and the other 4 board members sat at a long table at the front of the room. She was attempting to project an aura of complete control, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands as she shuffled her papers. She began the meeting by trying to gloss over the agenda, heading straight for the budget approval. This was her turf, a maze of numbers where she could confuse and intimidate. But we were not going to play her game. As soon as she opened the floor for new business, a resident I had spoken to, a retired accountant named Frank, stood up as pre-planned. "Madam President," he said, his voice firm, "I believe there is a more pressing matter. Many residents are concerned about the association's potential legal and financial exposure regarding the property owned by Colonel Miller." A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's face tightened. "That is a private legal matter being handled by the board," she snapped. "I don't think it is," I said, standing up. My voice was not loud, but it carried in the suddenly silent room. "Because it involves the illegal expenditure of community funds and actions that have exposed this entire association to massive liability." I walked to the front of the room, where a projector had been set up for the budget presentation. I connected my laptop. "If you'll allow me," I said, not waiting for permission. The first image that flashed on the screen was the 1928 survey map, my property lines clearly marked in red. "This," I began, "is my land. For the past 6 months, your president has been engaged in a campaign of harassment and intimidation against me, claiming this land belongs to the HOA. I clicked to the next slide, a high-resolution photo of the first violation notice. She has issued thousands of dollars in illegal fines. Next slide. A photo of the DEP's official letterhead showing the case number. She has violated state environmental law, triggering an official investigation by the Department of Environmental Protection, an investigation that could result in 6-figure fines payable by this association. Next slide. A crystal-clear still from the video of the failed dock moving, and 3 days ago she attempted to use HOA funds to hire a contractor to perform an illegal act on private property, an act that could have resulted in felony charges. The room was filled with angry muttering. Brenda was sputtering, trying to gavel me down, but no one was listening to her. "But her malfeasance isn't limited to my property," I said, my voice like ice. "It appears to be a pattern." On cue, Mrs. Gable stood up. "She fined me $400 because my roses were an unapproved shade of red," she said, her voice trembling but clear. Carlos Martinez stood. "She tried to put a lien on our house over our son's basketball hoop." One by one, 5 more people stood and told their stories. The pattern of abuse was laid bare for everyone to see. The mood in the room shifted from discontent to open revolt. "And where did the money for all this come from?" I asked, my tone deadly serious. I clicked to the final slides. Arthur Pinter's spreadsheets, invoices from Snodgrass Landscaping, LLC. Bank statements showing transfers from the HOA's reserve fund to pay legal fees. It came from you, from your dues, funneled through a beautification contingency fund into the pockets of her relatives and her lawyers. The room erupted. The shouting was deafening. Brenda was on her feet, her face a grotesque mask of rage and panic, screaming for order. It was then that David Chen rose to his feet. He exuded an aura of absolute calm in the chaos. "Madam President," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. "Given the clear evidence of gross mismanagement and potential criminal fraud, I believe a motion is in order." He let the silence hang for a moment. "I move that the board levy an immediate special assessment on all members to cover the expected legal fees and state fines resulting from the board's actions regarding Colonel Miller's property, an amount estimated to be no less than $200,000. It was the master stroke, the perfect trap. He had forced her hand. If she voted yes, she was admitting guilt and making everyone pay for her crimes. If she voted no, she was admitting the entire campaign against me was a baseless fraud. The crowd understood this instantly. "No!" someone yelled from the back. "She made this mess! She can pay for it!" The chant started. "No, no, no!" Frank, the retired accountant, stood again. "Madam President, I would like to propose an alternative motion." His voice boomed with newfound confidence. "I move for a vote of no confidence in this entire board and for their immediate removal from office effective immediately." "Seconded!" yelled at least 20 people at once. Brenda stood frozen, speechless. The bylaws required her to call the vote. Her face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. She mumbled the words, "All in favor." The response was a physical force, a roar of "A" that shook the room. All opposed. Silence. Utter, complete, damning silence. Not even the other board members dared to vote with her. It was over. She had been publicly stripped of her power. She stared out at the sea of hostile faces, her mouth opening and closing silently. Then, with a strangled sob, she grabbed her purse and fled the room, pushing her way through the crowd that parted for her with open contempt. The reign of Queen Brenda was over. In the immediate aftermath, a new interim board was elected on the spot. Arthur Pinter, the quiet treasurer who had risked everything, was nominated and approved as the new president by unanimous acclaim. Their first official act was to pass a motion voiding every fine levied by Brenda's board over the past 2 years. Their second was to issue a formal public apology to me and the other families she had targeted. Their third was to turn over all the financial documents I had presented to the local police department. The legal and financial consequences for Brenda were severe. The HOA, under its new leadership, sued her personally to recoup the embezzled funds. The district attorney's office brought criminal charges for fraud. Faced with ruin, she sold her house at a loss and disappeared. Her petty empire reduced to ash. The atmosphere in Heron's Landing transformed almost overnight. The oppressive quiet was replaced by the sounds of a community coming back to life. Children's laughter, the bounce of a basketball, the friendly chatter of neighbors. Mrs. Gable's roses bloomed in their defiantly non-compliant mulch. The fascistic Heron logos were quietly removed from the signage. A few weeks later, with the legal matters settled, I had the trespassing docks professionally removed from my lake. I sent the bill to the new HOA board, who paid it promptly. The following Saturday, I hosted a barbecue for the entire neighborhood on the shore of Miller's Lake. I put up a simple, hand-carved sign near the path that led from their common area to my land. It read, "Welcome, neighbors. Please respect the land." Children fished from the bank. Families spread out blankets on the grass. Arthur Pinter and I stood by the grill, watching the scene. "You know," he said, "for years, she told us you were this terrible enemy, this monster who wanted to ruin our community. But you're the one who actually saved it." "I just wanted to be left in peace, Arthur," I said. "Sometimes the price of peace is a well-planned war." Now, months later, I sit on my porch, just as I did that first morning. The binder, Operation Spring Freedom, sits on the small table beside me. Its mission is complete. I will take it to the fire pit later and give it a warrior's funeral. The lake, my lake, shimmers in the late afternoon sun, full and alive. The herons, ironically, have finally arrived, wading gracefully in the shallows. My land is quiet. It is my own. I have my peace. A profound, hard-won peace that settled back over this land like the cool evening mist. Petty tyranny, I reflected, thrives in darkness and silence. It cannot survive the bright, cleansing light of truth, especially when that truth is meticulously documented, legally fortified, and delivered with overwhelming force.